And by all means, if you have questions, I prefer that you ask them so that we can make this an interactive class like it normally would be if we were doing it live. I want to dedicate this class again to a refuah shlema v'gam kreva, to all those that are in need of refuah shlema for all different reasons, and especially those in need due to the horrible virus. I'm just going to look up a name right now if I can. Just a minute, please. I saw it today earlier here. Rafal Avraham Yeshaya ben Rivka. So let's have in mind the refuah shlema v'gam kreva for Rafal Avraham Yeshaya ben Rivka and all the others who are not well. And may we hear good news and miraculous news speedily and immediately. Okay. It's customary to recite the Pirkei Avos every week from Pesach till Shavuos. The way it's described in the Siddur, that's what it says. It says, the exact wording is, it's customary to recite the Pirkei Avos each week between Pesach and Shavuos, which is interesting to note that it says recite, it doesn't say to study. And the actual custom is that you should study a Mishnah or two or three in depth, but then to recite the rest of it, so at least you're getting through all of it. It doesn't mean recite it without understanding. Recite, look quickly at the English, but learning in depth one or two, and then reciting the rest of the chapter. So last week was chapter 1. Why is it that we start studying Pirkei Avos during this time? And the answer is twofold. Firstly, it's known that when the summer months come around, the weather gets warm, people start to do more for the health of the body during the winter, especially in the European countries. It was freezing outside, and people mostly spent their time, if they were ever outside, they were just running from one place to the next. But the summer months come, and people tend to their own health, doing exercise, walking, swimming, etc. And with that in mind, as a person starts focusing more on their physical needs, they're more likely, God forbid, to shirk their spiritual needs. So therefore, the rabbis implemented that during these times when we tend to be more physical, we should go out of our way to learn the words of wisdom of the sages in Pirkei Avos. The second reason is that as we prepare for Matan Torah, the words of wisdom in Pirkei Avos are what are known as the literal milsa de chasidusa. They're called words of great piousness. And that being the case, it helps us prepare for the receiving of the Torah. Now, the truth is, those two things sound a little bit contradictory. Because on the one hand, we're saying, well, hey, it's warm outside. And now that it's warm outside, everyone's having spring fever, and we better get more spiritual. So we got to whip ourselves into shape. And the other one is saying that we're learning the words of the greatest piety of all, the words of the sages to prepare for Matan Torah. Well, which is it? And the correct answer is both. That as we learn the words of Pirkei Avos, we find words that are simplistic. We find, by the way, if someone's raising a hand, you don't have to raise a hand. You can just unmute yourself and ask the question. If not, Yossi, I see Sarah's raising her hand. Sarah Freeman, if she can't, then you do it for her. Okay. But anyway, what we do is we find the words of the sages that hit us at two levels. They hit it at the very basic level, foundational levels of simplicity. Do good, don't do bad. And it also enters our souls and our intellect at the loftiest levels of spirituality. So this is what we find when it comes to the Pirkei Avos. One last thought about an introduction to Pirkei Avos is that when throughout the Mishnah, as we learn Mishnayos, it's all about laws. You can find out about if one ox gored another ox, okay? If you damage somebody's property, the laws of murder, the laws of Shabbos, spiritual laws, all different types of laws. Pirkei Avos is primarily not laws. Pirkei Avos are philosophical words. They're words to live by. And normally when we hear the sages talk, they're expressing their opinion on the specifics of how a law is meant to be kept and how the ruling should be. Pirkei Avos is we gleaned from these great sages, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, all of the great rabbis, we gleaned their words, and we found their words of wisdom. We found their words which talk about life, which talk about morality, which talk about how we should live. And this is what we learned during these summer months. Does Sarah have a question, Yossi?
And your extended forecast coming up in just a little bit. But for now, back to you guys. Everyone, thank you.
Yes, you want to?
I don't think she has a question.
Okay, so you want to mute? Just do a mute all, please.
Everyone's muted except for you now.
Okay. I don't think my computer's making noise. Okay, moving on. So it's also, many have the custom, Chabad certainly does, not only to learn the Pirkei Avos and study and recite the Pirkei Avos until Shavuos, but we continue on throughout the summer months, all the way up until Rosh Hashanah. Having said that, before we do Pirkei Avos each week, we open with a Mishnah. Okay, and that Mishnah that we open with, let's see if I can find that Mishnah. I suddenly don't have it. So give me a moment here while I check my screen and see what I've done with it. I see. That's what I did with it. So now let's move this back here and we'll find it more easily. Forgive me for talking to myself. Okay. And here we go. Pirkei Avos always begins, before we go through the 5 chapters of Pirkei Avos, and then there's an added on sixth chapter.
I cannot hear you, Rabbi Greene.
Yossi, can you hear me?
I can hear you great, Rabbi Greene.
Okay, so I'm thinking that Sarah's issue may be her computer. Could be that she didn't hit join with audio. I'm not really sure. But if everybody else can hear me, let's just take a quick...
Okay.
You good now? Wonderful.
Now,
Baruch Hashem.
now I can hear you. Thank
Excellent. You. Okay. So what we find here is as follows, that each week, before we start, we always begin with a certain Mishnah. And that Mishnah is the same Mishnah every week. And that Mishnah is these words, and I'm pointing to it now, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. So you can feel free to follow along as I point. All of Israel have a share in the world to come. Shene'amar, as the verse states, V'amich kulam tzadikim, your nation are all righteous. Li'olam yirshu aretz, they shall forever inherit the land. Neitzer mata'ai, they are the branch of my planting. Ma'aseh yadai. Sorry, 1 second. I have a mosquito that I got to get rid of. Yeah. Ma'aseh yadai, the handiwork of my hands, lehispa'er, in which I take pride. Each week before we start Pirkei Avos, even though each week is a new chapter, we always start with that same Mishnah. That Mishnah is taken from the tractate of Sanhedrin. It's not part of Avos. It's taken from Sanhedrin. And there are many things that are fascinating about that Mishnah. So since we're going to read that Mishnah every week, we might as well address this first. Okay? And the first question is, it says every Jew has a share in the world to come. So I got to ask you, if I already have a share in the world to come, why exactly is it that I'm busy trying to do Torah and mitzvahs? I'm good. I was born rich. I'm inheriting my share in the world to come. Who needs it? And there are many answers to that. Answer number 1 is that just because you have something doesn't mean you know how to use it, and doesn't mean that you're capable of using it. If I tomorrow give my 9-year-old son a brand new sports car, wow, he is so lucky. What's he going to do with it? Now, mind you, I didn't say if I give my 15-and-a-half-year-old a brand new sports car, because with or without a license, he'll figure out what to do with it. But my 9-year-old, is just nothing he can do with it. So what good is that wonderful gift and inheritance that he's getting if he can't use it? He's not equipped. In order for a gift, an inheritance, to be worth anything, you've got to make yourself a vessel to receive it. You've got to make yourself a keli. So for starters, there's that idea. that even though you already are rich and you have the share in the world to come, you better do Torah and mitzvahs so that you're able to deal with that share in the world to come. What does that mean? What is the world to come? Now, the truth is we're going to get to that. Which world to come we're talking about. There's the part of the world to come that's known as paradise or Gan Eden. There's another part of the world to come that's known as Tchias HaMesim, the time of the resurrection, that when Mashiach will come, those that repose in the dust, those that have been passed on and buried, their souls will return deliberately to their bodies and they will return to life. Tchias HaMesim. Difficult concept, difficult things to talk about. We're not going to deal too much with that part now because that could be a class in and of itself. That could be a series. But the bottom line is those are two elements that we talk about when we think of the world to come. Which part of the world to come is this Mishnah referring to? This Mishnah is referring to not paradise, not Gan Eden, but the Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. How do we know that? We know that for a few different reasons, okay? Firstly, you can look at the very context of that Mishnah. That Mishnah is in, as I said, it's in Sanhedrin, and it says the following. It says, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem, not yet, chelek la'olam haba. Every Jew has a share in the world to come. That's what the Mishnah says, and it explains why. The next words in the Mishnah, which we don't quote here, but if you look in the Masechta Sanhedrin, you'll see, are, Ve'elu she'ein lahem chelek la'olam haba. These are the ones that don't have a share in the world to come. Okay? So, wait a minute. And then it says, who are those that don't have a share in the world to come? The next thing it says is, one who denies that Tchias HaMesim is min haTorah. If someone denies that the resurrection of the dead is a reality in Jewish life, and that it's referred to and hinted to in the Torah, such a person has no share in the world to come. Why? The obvious. It's called Midah Kineged Midah. God always punishes measure for measure. Person says, I don't believe in the world to come. Good. Don't believe. You're not going to be there. You don't have a share in that part. That's what God says. Now, having said that, it turns out that that's one reason why we say it's talking about Tchias HaMesim, because we see the rest of the Mishnah. Another reason why we say it's talking about Tchias HaMesim is because ultimately it says Kol Yisrael. It says every Jew has a share. Now, not every Jew has a share in Gan Eden. They didn't. The reward, for starters, not every Jew has such a share. Whereas every Jew has a share in Tchias HaMesim. Why? Because the reward for the study of Torah is Gan Eden, is paradise. The reward for the performance of mitzvahs is Tchias HaMesim, is the resurrection of the dead. Why? What is paradise? Paradise is what's known as the yeshiva shel Maila. You know, on Yom Kippur, when the rabbi is up there about to start Kol Nidre, he begins Al Das HaMokayim, Al Das HaKol, Yeshiva shel Maila, Yeshiva shel Mata, Anu, right? So the Yeshiva Shel Maila is the heavenly Talmudic academy. And that's the yeshiva that exists up in heaven. What is Gan Eden? Gan Eden is paradise. Paradise is where Torah is studied day and night. There's the famous story that's, well, I'll tell you two stories, okay? Many years ago, we had Rabbi Emmanuel Shachat here to lecture, and he gave a lecture all about Mashiach and specifically about the resurrection of the dead and reincarnation. And he explained the following. He explained what is the difference between paradise and purgatory, or what is the difference between heaven and hell. He says there are those that say it's the exact same place. It's the same place. What does that mean? That means it all depends what you prepared for. If you spent your life studying Torah and doing mitzvahs and trying to elevate yourself in holiness and spirituality, a person passes on after 120 years and they go to Gan Eden and they're sitting in a place of immense spirituality where Torah is studied day and night. And the only focus is no focus on the body. There is no body. There's no focus on materialism or desires. There's only the focus on the study of Torah. So the person who strived for this their entire life, they're now in heaven. But the person who dedicated their lives to all things physical, the best steak, the best car, the best this, and absolutely not a care in the world when it came to spirituality, they suddenly find themselves in an environment surrounded by Torah, surrounded by spirituality. They don't know the language. They don't have an understanding of it. They're lost. They're in hell. The famous story that I heard many times where there was a certain very pious man. After 120 years, he passed away. He went up to heaven. And he gets a seat in a certain place. And he says to the administering angels, he says, listen, I appreciate where you've put me. And I'm sure this is exactly what I deserve. And I think it's nice. It's beautiful. But all my life, I always learned with my great rabbi. I learned with him every day till the day he passed on. And I feel that not for my merit per se, but because of my learning's merit, I should have the opportunity to be able to be next to him so that once again I could learn with him. Certainly, he's not going to come to my level. He shouldn't have to be degraded. So I'd like to be elevated to his level so that I could continue to study with this great rabbi. And the administering angel said, you have a point? Let's go. And they take him up many flights. Finally, he gets way up. And he walks into a room and he sees there's his Rebbe with a long flowing white beard standing at a podium at a stender. And he's giving his class, his wonderful class in Talmud. And he's surrounded by what seems to be the Swedish model team. And he looks at them and he looks at him and he says, I don't understand. He was such a spiritual man. Such a spiritual man. These people, this is his heaven? And the angel says, oh, no, this is their hell. I should have unmuted everybody before I did the punchline so I could hear the laughter, huh? Oh, well, we know for next time. You know what? I think I'm going to add a laugh track to my class next time. Anyway, the reality is that the reward for the study of Torah is Gan Eden, is paradise. Because you learned, so you get to learn. The reward for the performance of mitzvahs is Tchias HaMesim. Because the day that the soul left the body was the day that the soul could no longer perform a mitzvah. You know there's the custom when we go into a Jewish cemetery. The custom is for men to take their tzitzis and to take the tzitzis, which normally we wear out, and to tuck them in. Why do we tuck in our tzitzis? Because it would be considered taunting to the dead. Walking through the cemetery, flaunting my tzitzis, I'm saying, look at me, tzitzis represent all 613 mitzvahs. Look at me, I'm a physical human being, I can perform mitzvahs. You may be up in heaven, but you can't do a mitzvah. And we don't want to taunt the dead. But we see that the one thing that the person who passes away misses is the ability to perform a mitzvah. So when do they reap the reward for all the mitzvahs that they did? When Mashiach will come, they'll be resurrected, soul into the body. Once again, their soul, through the body that will be enclosed in, will be able to perform mitzvahs. Hence, the reward for the performance of mitzvahs is, in fact, Tchias HaMesim. And so you say, therefore, Kol Yisrael, every Jew has a share. Why? Because every Jew does a mitzvah. Every Jew has done a mitzvah. Now, not necessarily does every Jew have the same amount of whatever that means of Olam Haba, but they have a share, they have a portion. A chelik is a portion. Because it's described, it says every Jew is filled with mitzvahs the way a pomegranate is filled with seeds, which, by the way, we figured out a week ago in quarantine how many seeds there are in 6 different pomegranates. No, I'm kidding. We didn't. But when I was a kid, I remember learning that there's supposedly 613 seeds in a pomegranate. And my sisters and I on Rosh Hashanah did sit down and split the pomegranate in 4, did count the seeds. Turns out, I guess it's only a fully grown pomegranate because this one had 500 and something. I have to ask them if they remember the exact number. So every Jew is filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. And therefore, every Jew has a mitzvah. Every Jew is deserving of the reward for mitzvahs, which is Tchias HaMesim. Having said that, we go on in the Mishnah, and I will refer back to the words of the Mishnah again that we talked about before, which is the introductory Mishnah. And it says the words, they will forever inherit, and that's talking about the Olam Haba. Neitzer mata'ai. They are the branch of my planting. Why are we referring to them as the branch of my planting? And the reason is because the beauty of a branch is it's always connected to the tree. Even when a branch grows fruit, that fruit, its entire lifetime, is always connected to the tree and to the roots. And not God forbid, but when we pick a fruit, the fruit is severed from the tree, the fruit is no longer alive. As long as a branch lives, the branch remains connected to the tree. All other life forms, animals, etc., don't remain connected to their original source. So that being the case, we, the Jewish people, God says, are the planting of his branches, okay? Because we remain connected first and foremost to our Avos, to our parents, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and that gives us the ability to ultimately be connected to the Eibishter himself. Now, that's the introductory Mishnah. What we'll do now is we'll learn one Mishnah in Perek Aleph, which we missed last week, and then we'll learn one Mishnah in Perek Beis. So let's begin now with Perek Aleph. Okay, hold on. Okay. So the first Mishnah in Perek Aleph, Mishnah 1, Aleph, and I will follow along with my mouse as best as you can see, is Moshe Kibel Torah mi Sinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. U'Mesara li Yoshua, he gave it over to Joshua. V'Yeshua l'Zakanim, Joshua gave it to the elders. U'Zakanim l'Neviim, the elders gave it to the prophets. U'Neviim misaruha l'Anshe Knesset Hagdola. The prophets gave it over to the men of the Great Assembly. Well, we're talking about the men of the Great Assembly. Hey, Amru, they said, Shleisha Dvarim. 3 things. 1, Havu Mesunim Badin. Be careful, be slow, be deliberate and cautious in justice or in judgment. V'ha'amidu talmidim harbe. Bring up many students. V'asu siag la Torah. And make a fence around the Torah. That's what the Mishnah says. It's nice, sounds ethical, all good. There's so much to explore about that Mishnah. First of all, what connection there possibly is from the first part to the second part. What exactly it's talking about over here. Now, to get what it's talking about, we're going to need a little bit of context. And if you look carefully at the next few Mishnayos, the next Mishnah begins with the words, Shimon HaTzadik HaYemishari Knesset Hagdola. Shimon HaTzadik was the last of the Knesset Hagdola. The one after that says, Antigonus Ish Sochel Kibel Mi Shimon HaTzadik. Antigonus Ish Sochel received the Torah from Shimon HaTzadik. The Mishnah after that says, Yosef ben Yoezer Ish Treida Yosef ben Yochanan Ish Yerushalayim Kiblu Mehem. These 2 great rabbis received from Antigonus, and for that matter from Shimon HaTzadik. And then it goes on to tell us about the next rabbi, Yeshua ben Prachi and Nitai Arbeli. They received from the other guys. And then it tells us how Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach received from the other guys. And we keep going name after name after name. We're up to Hillel and Shammai, etc. And so you see what's really going on in this Mishnah. It's telling us that Moshe received the Torah, U'Misara, and he gave it over to Yoshua. It's telling us about the transmission of the Torah, specifically the transmission of the oral law. There's the written law, there's the oral law. Maimonides, the Rambam, explains to us how that worked. He explains that when Hashem gave the Torah, on the one hand, Hashem gave over the Torah, and to Moshe he gave over every single mitzvah, every single explanation. He didn't just say, keep Shabbos, don't do malacha, but to Moshe he explained what malacha, what the work is, all 39 different categories, and all of the offshoots that come from those 39 main categories of work. And in each thing, in each mitzvah that he gave to Moshe, he gave it with total and complete explanation. When Moshe taught it over to his brother, to his children, to his nephews, to the Zakanim, and to the entire Jewish people, Moshe taught over the Torah not only with the words that Hashem wrote in it, but with all of the explanation. Now, mind you, when ultimately the Torah was written down, all of the explanation was not. But it was encapsulated within the words of Torah in a very short form, a very synopsized form. This extra vav means this. This juxtaposition of these two verses means something else. Everything means something else. And they all allude to all of the mitzvahs that and explanations and commentaries that Hashem had explained to Moshe when he gave over the Torah to him. That which is actually written word for word is what we call the Torah Shebiksav, the written law. However, all the other stuff that Hashem told over to Moshe and Moshe told over to the Jewish people, that's the oral law, the Torah Shebal Peh. And that stuff didn't get written. Maybe Moshe wrote notes, perhaps, but it never got printed and published. How did it get given over to the next generation? Moshe gave it all over to Yoshua. Yoshua gave it all over. And if you look in the Rambam, if you look at Maimonides gives a name-by-name accounting of who gave it to whom, all the way till the Mishnah that we're learning here. And then he mentions the names of all of these rabbis that I just mentioned, the Mishnah, Antigonus Ish Socho, and Nitehar Bailey, and Yeshua ben Prachia, that each of them was responsible to transmit the oral law down to the next generation. That was their job, and that's what they did. Now, having said that, we look back at the Mishnah and we we ask a few questions. So allow me to do that.
Please. Okay. I hear the voice.
Yossi?
Okay.
So we look at it and we see that, let's go backwards. The Anshe Knesset Hagdolah received the Torah from the Nevi'im, from the prophets. The prophets received the Torah from the Zekanim, the elders. The elders received it from Joshua, Yehoshua. Yehoshua received it from Moshe. Where did Moshe receive the Torah from? The real answer should be Hashem. And yet we see the answer here is Sinai, from Sinai. Why did it say from Sinai? Let it say from Hashem. The answer to that is that when we talk about the transmission of the oral law, we're talking about a transmission that requires a tremendous amount of humility. What is the lesson of Sinai? Everybody knows that rather than Hashem choosing the tallest mountain to give the Torah, Hashem chose Mount Sinai, which was not the tallest mountain, to teach us the lesson of humility. Why did the lesson of humility have to be taught to us right then when giving the Torah? Maybe the Torah should have been given on the highest mountain. It's the greatest event that ever happened in the world. No. If you want Torah to get to the next generation, it has to come through humility. And ultimately, when it comes to humility and we're ready to accept it, then and only then can we have Torah transmitting generation to generation. Let's get an understanding of what that means, the oral law for generations. The Torah was given in the year 2448, 2448. We are now in the year 5780. If you're really good at math, good for you. I'm not. But I can take my phone and go 5780 minus 2448 and find out that that's 3,332 years ago the Torah was written. The Torah was given. So you expect me to believe that laws that were given over orally have sustained 3,332 years? Well, first of all, eventually they were written down. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who authored the Mishnah, took the oral law and he wrote it and published it because he felt that the generations would be lost and they wouldn't be able to continue. But until that time, it was not written down. But let me give you an example of the oral law. I'm staring at my screen, and I see on my screen, I see Mark Lippman. Hi, Mark. Mark, you want to wave? Nice. Okay. Mark Lippman is a Kohen. So I'm going to unmute Mark, and we're going to have a conversation. And Yossi, if you can turn us to speaker view instead of spotlight for a second, it'll be good. Mark, can you tell me, I'm not sure what you did there, but anyway, Mark, can you tell me, you're a Kohen, is that correct?
Correct.
Good. How do you know you're a Kohen?
My father told me.
Your father told you. Now,
And his father told him.
I know your father's very well dressed, and I know he sings very nicely. I've seen on social media. But how did your father know he's a Kohen?
Because his father told him.
And how did his father know?
He knew.
Because his father told him.
Exactly.
Okay, Yossi, let's go back to me here, Yossi. Okay, and something I've always wanted to do, so I finally can. I'm going to mute Mark. Shouldn't tell Heather that can be done, should we? And what Mark is saying is that he believes that he's a Kohen because his father's father, that he's going back 3,332 years, not to Moshe, but to Aaron HaKohen. So to an extent, it sounds a little bit ridiculous. How possibly could you know? You really believe that this chain went all the way back 3,500 years to know you're a Kohen? And the answer is, yeah, he does believe it. And so do I, and so do you. We all believe it. Not only that, but it took them 3,500 years, but they finally came up with a DNA study. And the DNA study that they came up with was originally designed, if I'm not mistaken, for this in Israel by probably Bar Ilan University. They did a DNA study, and I don't remember exactly how, I read about it in U.S. News and World Report 25 years ago. I don't know how many people they did, but they took DNA from a huge amount of people, many of them being Kohanim, and they did all of these different types of randomized tests. And they found out that people who claim to be Kohanim have a 90-something% rate of accuracy to have a familial code that's unique only to these people claiming to be Kohanim. They're not related. They're not cousins. They're coming from all different places. The fact that they're Kohanim gives them a DNA that they share. This study went on to be used by a descendant of Sally Cummings. Sally Cummings was a slave of Thomas Jefferson. There were always rumors that the relationship was a little bit more than just her being a slave. And about 20-something years ago, the children, the offspring of Sally Cummings, were protesting that they wanted to be included in the Jefferson Society of Descendants of Thomas Jefferson. And they said, it's not true. We don't believe it. We don't know. They used that same test that was originally designed for determining the DNA of Kohanim. And they found that, in fact, her children were descendants, had a familial connection to Thomas Jefferson. Nowadays, we know DNA testing is done all the time for all different types of things. But it's not the DNA testing that makes someone a Kohen. It's the Masorah. I always tell the story. I'll tell it again. There's a certain gentleman, Davins, in one of the Chabads that we know. Many of you actually know this gentleman, but I won't use him by name without asking his permission. And this gentleman started davening at Chabad. He came to Rabbi Gordon, and he said to Rabbi Gordon, Olav Shalom, I'd like to be called up as a Kohen. Rabbi Gordon said, are you a Kohen? I know this sounds like one of those bad jokes, but this is a real story. Are you a Kohen? He says, I think I am. He says, why? He says, I just always felt like I am. He says, well, did your father tell you he's a Kohen? He said, no, but I feel that I am. He says, what does that mean? He says, ask your father. His father's no longer living. So he says, I can't call you up as a Kohen until you can prove that you're a Kohen. About a month later, he comes back with a folder and he says, I got it. And he shows him the DNA study. He says, I knew I always was a Kohen. Look, the DNA study shows that I'm a Kohen. And Rabbi Gordon said, thank you, that's wonderful. But that won't be proof in a shul. Based on that, we won't call you a Kohen. And we won't call your daughter a Bas Kohen. It's just not going to fly. You need, the idea of being a Kohen is Masorah. It's handed down from generation to generation. You need someone who can testify to the fact they saw your father called as a Kohen. If you can get a copy of your parents' ksuba, if your father was listed as a Kohen, if we can find a grave site of your grandfather on your father's side that lists him as HaKohen. We need a Masorah. We need a transmission of oral law. Ultimately, with the help of some organizations, I'm not exactly sure which, ultimately, with the help of some organizations, he went ahead and he found out that indeed he was a Kohen. Since then, he gets an aliyah every other week, and he regrets. Okay, anyway, the fact is that Baruch Hashem, he's a Kohen. But what we see in this story is that it's not the DNA, it's the Masorah. Okay. When it comes to the Masorah, there has to be a level of humility. The next generation has to understand, because the next generation normally thinks of themselves as smarter than we are. They know more. I mean, half of you, how'd you get onto Zoom today? Let's be honest. If not today, the first time you went on Zoom, what did you do? You went to your 11-year-old, right? Or your 9-year-old, or your kid and said, help me, how do I do this? They seem to feel that they know more than we do, and in some areas they do. But then there's the areas where they don't. And if they don't have the humility to accept the wisdom of Torah that comes from the previous generations, Torah would be lost. Hence, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. That's why it had to be considered that it was specifically from Sinai. Having said that, it's because Sinai represents the concept of Mount Sinai, the humble mountain, humility. Now, as we look at the names here in this Mishnah, it's confusing. Because there were two ways that the Mishnah could have been authored. And the way it is authored is not one of either of those two ways. I guess there's really three ways, but two ways that seem to make a lot more sense. If the Mishnah wants to account for the transmission from generation, the handing down of the Torah from generation to generation, then like the Rambam did, the Mishnah should have mentioned all the names. Should have mentioned the names of each and every one of the prophets, okay? And each and every one of the kings, and all of the people in all the generations. And instead, it just like synopsized. It says Moshe, Yeshua, elders, prophets, we're done. It skips out everybody. If the Mishnah wanted to synopsize, it could have gone even better. It could have said, Moshe handed the Torah down from generation to generation till he met at the Great Assembly, and skipped all the mills, right? And then, once it mentioned the men of the Great Assembly, then our Mishnayos would mention person after person and what they said. But why does it go this weird middle road where it mentions Moshe, Yoshua, the Canaan elders, Nevi'im prophets, and Anshe Knesset Agdola, men of the Great Assembly? Why are they so relevant to this Mishnah? Another question you can ask is, what does the first part of this Mishnah talking about the Masorah have to do with the second part of the Mishnah, which tells us about being deliberate in judgment and bringing up many students? I mean, where's the connection there? It's like, it's telling us a history, and then it just takes a sidestep and says three arbitrary weird things. It just doesn't make sense. Another question that you could ask is, it talks about the Anshe Knesset Agdola, and it said, Heim Amru Shleisha Devarim. They said three things. Turns out that the average person studying Mishnah knows how to count. So it didn't need, Mishnah doesn't use extra words. Mishnah should have said, Heim Amru, they said, and then just tell us the things. Why does it have to accentuate that it's three things? That must mean something. And finally, the whole concept that it mentions Nevi'im is also strange, using the word Nevi'im. Because when we talk about the word Nevi'im, we're focusing on their Nevuah. What is Nevuah? Nevuah is prophecy. Prophecy does not relate to Jewish law. Jewish law does not come from prophecy. Prophecy is God spoke to this person and said, tell the Jewish people to something, and he tells them something that God said. But Jewish law is not paskined by, it's not ruled on by prophecy. Everybody knows the famous story of, I believe it's Rabbi Elazar was having a dispute with all of the other rabbis around him. It was a dispute about an oven and the specific status of the oven. Is it considered pure? Is it considered impure based on what happened to the oven? And all of the other rabbis disagreed with him. And he was getting very frustrated. He said, you guys aren't learning it right. You're missing the point. He was so frustrated. He said, if I'm right, let the waters prove me to be right. And suddenly the brook that was flowing in the back of where they were learning started flowing backwards. And they said, we don't care. And he argued a second thing. Finally, he said, if I'm right, let the walls of this house prove that I'm right. And the walls started to shake like it was going to collapse. And they begged him, make it stop. He made it stop. They didn't die. And then they still weren't convinced. He said, if I'm right, let a bas call come from heaven. Let a heavenly voice ring out and say that I'm right. 1 second later, a voice rang out from heaven and said, Rabbi Elazar has interpreted this correctly. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? The conclusion of the rabbis was, nevertheless, no. What do you mean no? Heaven just spoke. And their answer was, as we say in Hallel, Lo Bashamai. No, we don't say Hallel. We say in Parshas Ki Nitzav Vayelech, okay? We say, Ki Karev Elecha Adavar, right? The Torah is close to you. Before that, we said, Lo Bashamayim Hi. Torah is not in heaven. It's not far away in heaven. Torah is here on earth. So the fact that heaven ruled doesn't mean anything here. And as long as we, the rabbis, followed the procedures given to us in Torah, even if the conclusion is wrong, it doesn't matter, because Torah was given for us to interpret following the proper procedures. We did, And in such situations, there was an issue of the majority opinion of the rabbis that rules, and that's it. Lo b'shamayim. So that being the case, what does the fact that somebody is a Navi have to do with Jewish law? And this mission is all about handing down the law and the Torah. And the Anshe Knesset Agdola are all about making laws. So to answer all of those questions, we need to get a better understanding of the names that are mentioned. Moshe, let me go back to the screen for a second. The names being Moshe, Yehoshua, Joshua, Zikanim, the elders, Nevi'im, the prophets, and Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of the Great Assembly. So now, let's take a look at what they mean. Who is Moshe? Moshe's primary, more than any other quality of Moshe, is Moshe's quality of humility. Moshe's quality of humility. Moshe was called Anav Mikol Adam. He was more humble than anyone else who ever lived. Not that he didn't know he was great. He knew he was great, but he knew that his greatness came from God. And he didn't consider himself to be anything important just because he was great, just because he had greatness within him. If we want to learn Torah, we have to be a proper vessel. We want to be a proper vessel for the study of Torah. Very simply, what we need to do is we very simply need to humble ourselves to the study of Torah. And if we can't humble ourselves to the study of Torah, like Moshe Rabbeinu, then Torah won't stick. So that's first and foremost. And as we mentioned before, the transmission of Torah. Yehoshua, what does Yehoshua represent? It talks about Yehoshua. It says in the Torah, Lo yomish mitocha ohel. He never left the tent. Yehoshua studied Torah 24/7. He never left. He was in a description which is known as, or a category known as, Toraso umnaso. Torah was his trade. He did nothing else. He didn't take vacations. He didn't need a coffee break. He only ate to live, and he studied Torah. You want to have an understanding of that, just a little bit. In our generation, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, from the time the Lubavitcher Rebbe became Rebbe, he went to 770, to Shul, to his study, and to his home. And many times didn't even go to his home, but they created a second home in the library next door. He didn't even go home. Those are the only places he ever went. In all of the years from 1951 till his passing, the only other three places that he went is Nebuch. When he was sick, he did go to the hospital, although the first time he was sick, he didn't even go to the hospital. He went to the grave site of his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. He went there many days a week and spent hours and hours there, and that was part of his spirituality and his service to God. He went twice on a trip to Gan Yisrael, New York, to Camp Gan Israel, up in the mountains, because he was the one with the inception of the idea that Gan Israel be called that, and that it start the way it should start. And he went to see Gan Israel twice. One of the times that he went there, the car broke down, and they had to wait for someone to come fix it. I don't remember the specifics of what was wrong until finally it was fixed and he came back. And for years, the Rebbe talked about having to deal with making up for the time that was lost when the car broke down. The Rebbe's time was day and night. He slept an hour a day, would go days without sleeping. Torah needs to be with that kind of focus. Now, obviously, you and me can't necessarily be on that level. But while we're studying, the focus has to be focus. While we're studying, we have to, at least in that microcosm of the few minutes when we're studying, be that level of I'm in and nothing else exists. That's what we learned from Yehoshua. From the Zikanim, the word Zakain, elder, is an acronym, so to speak, for Zeh Shekana Torah, someone who has acquired Torah. What's the difference between acquiring something and just getting it as a gift? When you toil and when you work for something, it's internalized. It means so much more to you. So Zikanim is that we have to not just, sit back, relax, and hope some Torah will sink in. We have to go at it. We have to toil at it. We have to work at it so that we can truly, properly internalize it. Nevi'im. What the Nevi'im remind us ultimately is, though, what's the Navi? What's the trick about the prophet, the Navi? It's the direct line to God. God talks to him. person gets into the study of Torah and they start thinking about how wise I am and how brilliant I am and how brilliant the Torah is, and start thinking about it as a secular type of subject of wisdom, and it taught me how to reason and it taught me critical thinking, yeah, that's all good, but that's not what it is. We never can forget that ultimately Torah is very simply the word of God. Hence, we use the word Nevi'im within this structure of who handed down the Torah. Until finally, Anshe Knesset Hagdola, who and what were they? They were a body. We talked about them the other day as well. They're the ones who established davening 3 times a day. They established what the prayers are. The men of the Great Assembly were all about law, paskining halachas, making the takanas, making edicts to help Torah be kept, and ruling on situations so that Torah would be kept properly. So what we have to realize when we study Torah is there's theory and reality. If one day I decide I'm going to study art, I think art is really nice. I'm going to go study art. Good. I'll do good. I'll do bad. I'll do whatever I do. It doesn't really matter because it's just a hobby. But if I decide that I'm going to give a class next week in I decide this follows, that this year I'm going to go to a place and I'm going to kosher it. I'm going to go to a hotel and I'm going to kosher it out because they want to become a kosher hotel. Good. Before I go to this hotel and kosher a massive kitchen, I'm going to sit myself down and I'm going to learn the laws again of exactly how to deal with all the intricacies of koshering out a commercial kitchen. Now, when I learn those laws, it ain't going to be the way I learn art. It's going to be in a very serious, meticulous way because I know that I need to apply this. When we learn Torah and we recognize that it's about living it according to Jewish law, like the Anshe Knesset Agdola represent, then we'll learn Torah in a completely different way. We'll learn Torah in a way where it matters. We're learning it for real. This is the famous story. My son told over the story, I think, at his bar mitzvah. A bar mitzvah boy went to the Rebbe for a private audience. The Rebbe engaged the child in conversation and said to the boy, do you like baseball? The kid said, I love baseball. He was in shock that this is what the holy rabbi, is asking him about baseball. And the Rebbe said to him, are you a fan? He said, yeah. What team? He told him which team. He said, do you ever go to a game? He says, I do. He said, tell me, did it ever happen that you're at a game and you left in the middle? He said, sure. And the Rebbe said, did it ever happen that in the middle of the game some of the players left? Or he had just been to a game and he said he left in the middle. Why? He said, because they were losing so badly, I just left. The Rebbe said, did the players leave too? He said, no. He said, well, why not? He said, because I'm just a fan. But for the players, they're players. This is real. It's real. When we learn Torah, we don't learn Torah like a fan. We learn Torah like a Major League Baseball player, okay? And we learn it like it counts and like our average counts and our statistics count and national television is watching us. We learn Torah for real to be able to know Jewish law. When we take all of those aspects, we have an understanding of how Torah can be transmitted with humility, with humility of Moshe, the diligence of Joshua of Yehoshua, with the toil of the Zekanim of the elders, with the understanding of the godliness as the prophets have, and finally, with the practical application of the Anshe Knesset Hagdola. And this also answers the following. It answers the question as follows. Hey Mamru Shlosha Dvarim. What does that mean? They said there's 3 things. It's not talking about the next 3 things in the Mishnah. They said there's 3 things. You might think there's me and there's God. There's me studying Torah. There's God that I'm serving. There's God receiving my Torah study. There's God receiving my worship. There's the give and the take. There's 2 things. And the Anshe Knesset Hagdola said, no, there's 3 things. There's you, there's God, and there's the world around you upon which you apply Torah. There are lots. The whole reason why Torah was given to man was so that we could live in the world and elevate the world. So yes, there's the Yehoshuas. Yes, there's the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai who sit and their only life is Torah. But for the world, there's still a world. And when you go out and you're a real estate agent, and when you go out and you're a salesman, you're a police officer, whatever it is that you do, and you bring Torah with you into the business world around you, and you follow the laws of weights and measures, and you follow all of the laws of kashrus as you're eating out on the road, you bring Torah into the world. That's what the Anshe Knesset Agdala said. There's not two things of just you and there's God, and we're stuck in a room studying Torah. There's a world waiting for you to apply the laws of Torah, to go into that world and to elevate it through your practicing of the laws of Torah. Now, what are the three things that they said? They said, be careful in judgment. What does that have to do with the Masorah? We're talking about this transmission from generation to generation. It's very simple. When you meet another Jew, and it seems that that Jew is not following law the way he should, and your reaction is to say, look at this bad guy. He doesn't keep Shabbos. Look at these people. Look at this community. Look at those people. As you write them off, because they're too secular, or they don't keep enough, etc., as you quickly judge them, what you're really doing is you're alienating them. And as you alienate that person who, for whatever reasons, is having his difficulties with Yiddishkeit, whether it's a personal issue, an emotional issue, an ignorance issue, some of them maybe not even his fault. As you write that person off and alienate them, what happens to their children? Where do you think their grandchildren will be? So the Masorah, the transmission from generation to generation, God forbid, could be cut off right here and now if I go and am overly judgmental to the next Jew. Hence, the rabbi said, the Anshe Knesset Agdala said, we want the transmission of Torah to continue. Be deliberate, be careful in judgment. Don't jeopardize a relationship with another Jew. Having said that, they didn't say just leave them alone and let them be. They said, Ha'amidu talmidim harbe. Bring up many students. You can't leave them alone. Get in there. Have an influence. Make them a student. Teach them. Because if you don't, you're still jeopardizing the Masorah. Where will the next generation be if they're not getting an education? So get out there and find the fifth son that didn't make it to the Seder because he didn't know there was one, and find him and bring him to the Seder. And it's not enough just to teach him a little. It's ha'amidu. You have to bring him up. You have to bring him to a whole new level. And it's not enough to find one or two. It has to be harbe. It has to be many. Those are the words that they said. Let's take another look at their words. They said, ha'amidu, talmidim, harbe. Bring up many students. It's not good enough, just one or two. And that way we'll guarantee the transmission. And finally, va'asu siag la Torah, make a fence around the Torah. What does that mean? That means that as we're getting out there in the world and we're not being judgmental to the next person and we're finding ways to reach the next person, don't forget, it has to be in a way where you're bringing them to Torah, not, God forbid, you're compromising Torah to their level. You're teaching Torah to them, you're bringing them Torah, but you're bringing them up to the level of Torah. But if a person starts to say, well, if I got this many people to come on a Zoom class, what if I give a Zoom class on Shabbos? How many people could I get to come on a Shabbos to a Zoom class, right? It's a good idea. It's only for learning. I won't use it for fun. God forbid. God forbid, because it's Chilul Shabbos, it's desecration of the Shabbos. And imagine if we took the Mechitza down in Shul, how many more people would come? God forbid. That's not what we're saying. Yes, we judge carefully and we're non-judgmental. Yes, we'll reach out to teach that person so that Torah will transmit to the next generation. But no, we don't, God forbid, compromise Torah. On the contrary, asu siag la Torah, we protect Torah. We put a fence around Torah to guarantee that it's kept to the highest of standards, no matter whom we're teaching. And then we're guaranteeing that the Torah will be transmitted to the next generation. We're going to do one Mishnah now, quickly, and we'll end this class in about 8 minutes, okay? And we'll start a Mishnah from the second parak, so at least we started it. We won't necessarily finish, but at least we'll start. And then we'll end the class. It started at 8. It'll be long over by 9:15. Okay. We go to chapter 2. By the way, you'll notice that I'm learning this on Chabad.org, and you can find the same thing. We actually have a link to it each week in our newsletter, so before Shabbos, you can click on it, you can print it. Okay. Chapter 2. because again, last week was chapter 1. This coming week is chapter 2. We'll learn at least a little bit from chapter 2 as well. Next week, we'll resume to chapter 3, and we'll get back onto a normal schedule. Rabbi Omer. Rebbe says, who is Rebbe? Rebbe is actually Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who is the one known as the redactor of the Mishnah. He's the one who compiled all of the teachings of the rabbis, containing all of the generations and generations of oral law, and he's the one who put it into the Mishnah. And that's the first writing of the oral law of the Torah Shabbal Peh. And he says, Eizohi derech yeshara sheyavar leiha adam. What is the straight path that man should choose? Kol shehi tiferes lo'iseha v'seferes lo'imina adam. Anything which is going to be beautiful to the one that does it, and will also be beautiful or harmonious, as it says over here, to mankind. Let's try and understand this for a moment. If we look carefully, we can see it at two different levels. Firstly, there's a dispute as to the proper path in Yiddishkeit. Some say, if I deprive myself of all things physical, and I make sure that I remain poverty-stricken, I'm guaranteeing that I focus my life on spirituality. There's another opinion, which is Rebbe's opinion, which is that's not the case. That a person can have material things, can have comfort, can have worldly things, and dedicate them toward godliness. So you see here, he says, what is the proper path to choose? That which is harmonious or beautiful for him and to mankind. It means that my keeping of Torah doesn't have to be that I walk around in rags with a miserable look on my face because it's so, as Jackie Mason would probably say, oiskemuchert, right? It doesn't have to be that. Torah can be that where when a Jew walks down the street, a person looks and says, wow, what a wonderful life. Yeah, I can make a song out of that. What a beautiful life. Look at him. Look at the way they walk together with the family. This is the epitome of beauty. He feels good. People feel good when they see it. That's okay, Rebbe says. But there's another way to look at that Mishnah as well. Not only that's okay, he says that's the best path. There's another way to look at it. Okay? And that is as follows. Ezohi derech yeshara. Put the question mark there. What is the proper path? The answer to that is sheyavar leiha adam. The proper path is for man to choose. What does that mean? That means that rather than performing mitzvahs, because I must, because God said so, and they're difficult, but I do them anyway. No. Develop a relationship with God. Develop a relationship with Torah and mitzvahs so that I don't do them because I must, but I do them because I love them. I do them because I choose them. I'll give you an analogy. I imagine now in quarantine, everybody's spending a lot of time working out, right? Like, right? Yes. Say yes. Nobody will know. There's people who, like myself, who know I got to exercise, and I dread it, and I don't want to. And by the way, if you want to know, I've been planning to exercise and talking about exercising regularly for 28 years now. And it has not caused me to lose any weight. So I don't even know if it's worth anything. Well, the planning to exercise hasn't caused me to lose any weight. Maybe if I did it, perhaps. But for me to go and start with push-ups and sit-ups, it's torture. And sometimes, I'll get through a week or two or three. And every day is torture. When a person does two things, they study and they get an understanding of health and an understanding of the physiology of it and what exercise does for them. So they've internalized it mentally, logically, and they do it often, they do it religiously. It starts to become something, it's a passion. I must exercise. I want to exercise. I enjoy it. And the person that exercises that way has a whole new feeling and understanding of it. Do you know when you know that your kids have grown up? The day your kid says to you, man, I need a shower. Because you spend the first somewhere between 11 and 14 years of your child's life saying, take a bath, take a shower. I don't want to. Go take a shower. I don't want to. You fight it out. You finally get them to, they did, they didn't, right? One day your kid says, wow, I need a shower. You know they've grown up. suddenly they've internalized it, and the shower is no longer a burden. It's something they look forward to. So we look back at this Mishnah, Lahavdil. Ezoihi derech yeshara. What is the proper path? Sheyavar le'ha'adam. That when it comes to Yiddishkeit, when it comes to Torah, that man is choosing to do it, not just because he has to, but because he's learned it and internalized it and wants to do the mitzvah and makes it a part of him. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. And that's the best way for a person to do so. And we'll see the next time this chapter comes around how that actually has to do with the rest of the Mishnah, everything else being said in that Mishnah, which is that ultimately there'll be a balance, that we have to recognize that it's not only because I want to. Once a person starts doing things not because they have to, but because they desire to, they can never lose sight of the Kabbalah's all, the acceptance of not only I want to, but also I have to. Because otherwise, God forbid, a person only does it when they want to. So there has to be the balance, but ultimately the best level is to learn Torah, to learn to appreciate the mitzvahs in a way where we enjoy it rather than we're forced to do it, and that's the best path for man. We'll conclude the Pirkei Avos section now. A couple of program notes. Let me just double check what's happening with that next class. Give me a moment. See if we were answered here. No. I do believe that Rabbi Morty is going to be giving his class again. It may be Sunday night, not Saturday night, but we will communicate with you again either tomorrow morning in the newsletter or later Friday afternoon and let you know when Rabbi Morty's class will be. This class is going to continue again. We're going to do Tuesday nights. We're going to continue on in our class about davening, and we'll be opening the Siddur and beginning with going through the actual Siddur, the prayers and explanation. Thursday night will be, again, Pirkei Avos. On behalf of German and everyone else, I want to wish everyone a Chodesh Tov, a Guten Chodesh, because it is now Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Tonight, we have to remember, I was getting there, okay? German is sending me messages. Tonight in the Ma'ariv, if you didn't daven yet, you have to make sure to add in the Ya'aleh V'Yavo, and of course, don't forget to count Sfira. I'm going to be sending out in our newsletter detailed instructions about davening for Shabbos, because it's not the regular davening, it's a special musaf, and a lot of other things. So similarly to the way we did it in Pesach, we'll have a very detailed schedule with page numbers about what the davening is for Rosh Chodesh, so that everybody knows exactly what to do. And with that in mind, we'll give everybody a minute or two. Yossi, if you could unmute everybody. We'll give everybody a minute or two to say hello and to say goodbye. And then we'll end the class. We thank you for joining us. And Amir Tashem, we look forward to seeing you again on the Zoom Minyan on Sunday and Monday.
And tomorrow.
Monday night class with Rabbi Ari, and my class Tuesday night, and Rabbi Morty's class whenever it will be.
Rabbi Greene, there's a Zoom meeting tomorrow too.
Always good to see you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all for coming. I'd love to get everybody to show their faces just for a minute.
He's laughing. It's okay.
Stay safe, Rabbi.
Great job, Mark.
I'm muting everybody for 1 second. I'm muting. Second, I'll unmute you. I just want to say, anybody who's willing to show your face even for a minute, we all miss each other so much. It'd be so good to see everybody. Only if you want to, no pressure. Okay, you're back on. Everybody can talk again.
Thank you. Rabbi.
Yeah, it's so many people here. I haven't seen in so long. It's very nice. Baruch Hashem, good to see friendly faces. Good to get together. We see more than ever how important it is for us to get together. Sarah has raised her hand again. Sarah,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you very much. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
L'chaim,
Good
Rabbi,
having
l'chaim.
everybody here.
Yasher Koach,
Thank you
Rabbi
so
Greene.
very much.
Good seeing
Thank you,
you all.
Rabbi. It was very interesting.
Thank you. All right,
Thank
ladies
you.
and gentlemen,
Thank you.
Itzik,
Thank
good
you,
to
Rabbi
see you.
Greene.
Wave, Itzik.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good Shabbos.
Chazak
Thank you so very much.
Shabbos.
All right, Shabbos, everybody. Chodesh Tov. We'll meet
Tov.
again shortly. If you have questions, don't hesitate to call, to text, to ask. It's not easy when we can't reach each other, so I don't feel like we're being nagged. On the contrary, we feel like whenever anybody reaches out with a question, we say thank you, because sometimes we get too busy to be in touch, and it forces us in a good way that we should stay in touch with each other. Have a wonderful Shabbos, a wonderful Kodesh, and may we hear good news, miraculous news,
Amen.
and
Amen.
the coming of Mashiach.
Amen.
Bye and Shabbat Shalom.
חזק וברוך.